So, Paul, you have these unusual gifts. Could you tell me how they started in your life? Did it start when you were a child? What experiences did you have?
Yeah. My earliest awareness of what you would call the more subtle side of life and the hidden side of life probably goes back to when I was a little boy, somewhere around the age of 5, I would think, something like that. Yeah. And there were various incidents during that period that I can recall fairly clearly, even today.
So what were they?
Well, I grew up in a very Catholic family, and so we used to go to church, to mass every Sunday, and I remember seeing people in the church who were obviously not three-dimensional people, because I could see through them sometimes. And that was a very early recollection, how I would sit next to one and they'd be sitting there in the pew or in the chair. And I must have been, as I say, about 5, I would think so, something like that, 4 or 5 years old. So that was a very early memory of that.
So did you mention that to your parents, or how did...
I don't know whether I did at that point. I can't really recall whether I mentioned it. I certainly learnt later on that it was something that you didn't discuss openly with people because they found it strange.
So that's clairvoyance, isn't it? Seeing.
That's what we would call clairvoyance, yes. That's what they tend to mean by clairvoyance, which means clear seeing, or seeing clearly beyond, really, this three-dimensional world, yeah.
So that was the first. Did you then start to hear?
Well, I think the two things probably were working side by side, but it was the vision that I remember most. The hearing of voices and things was something that I identified later as being also evident, that these sounds also came sometimes from another level, or another dimension, or whatever we want to call it,
So that's what we call clairaudience, isn't it?
Clairaudience, yes. That means clear hearing. Yes. And a lot of people that are psychically awakened, because everybody is psychic, we've all got psychic ability, everybody has these sort of facilities in them to see clearly and to hear clearly on these other levels. Yes, that's exactly what it means. Yeah.
Yes. So were there any particular experiences as you were growing up that you remember?
One or two. I remember from a clairvoyant perspective, going back to being at church again, and it's often in situations where there's a highly charged emotional aspect to what is going on, where people have these high experiences, these peak experiences, or these deep insights, often around a death or an anniversary or a passing or a birth or something of that nature, or even a fine performance. We're in a place today that's often used for music, and music often brings a peak experience. Artists have the same kind of insights, but children, of course, as children, we're not worn down by the I would call it conditioning that takes place during our lives. So we're more accepting of seeing these things. And I remember at church particularly seeing a gentleman once and talking to him. And then somebody came and appeared to sit on him because he was in the pew next to me. But of course, he was not a three-dimensional being like you and I. And I remember talking to my mother about that. She spoke to the priest about it, and the priest knew who the gentleman was. It was someone that attended the church before the war. So I remember that experience. And I also, in those days, used to see these amazing lights around the altar at the consecration of the Mass, with the bread and wine. And there were you see these very beautiful, vibrant lights, almost metallic light, coloured lights, around where the priest was. And I remember that. And it was later on in life I worked out this is what people mean by angels. They become romanticized a little bit, these entities. But I can remember that very vividly indeed. Yeah.
And you described a wonderful experience when you were at school in a book
Oh yeah, that was
read.
when I was at grammar school. I was
Right.
about, I don't know, difficult to put an age on it, probably about 14, maybe a bit younger. And I could see the light coming out of people as they were singing, and all the different colours and the vibrations, and I didn't know what it was. I found it very difficult actually at that period. I remember that. I'd be wanting to tell people about it, tell my schoolmates, but I didn't. Oh yes, when people sing or perform, or in many situations, this is to do with the aura and the light field, which I wrote a book about some years ago, and it changes as we change and as we move into different emotional states and different mental states. And I remember watching that particular school one day and seeing all these beautiful colours and movements around people as we sang a particularly beautiful hymn, actually. I recall that, yes. Yeah.
So could you say a little bit more about the aura?
The aura, the aura is it's a part of us, really. It's not. We tend to speak. We say people have a certain aura. The aura is a part of us. It's like a field that emanates from individuals, and there are many layers to this. And of course, there are lots of illusions to this field. It appears on some levels to be brilliantly coloured, like iridescent firework type colours. It's full of information and symbols and images and all kinds of things. And everything radiates this kind of field. Both human beings, animals, even the building, objects do too. I developed the skill of working with this and interpreting this and understanding it over the years. To me, it's a very important aspect of what I do, really.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
So you find that different colours denote different
Well, they're
states,
frequencies,
qualities.
yes.
in
The colours we
person.
see in an aura are the mind's way of interpreting different frequencies in this field, and the references to this field I meant to say a few moments ago are quite broad. You find it mentioned in Joseph's coat of many colours, for example, in the Bible, is indicative of this light. Really, it's a metaphor for that. And equally, even the headdress of the North American Indian was very much based upon this phenomena. And of course, an aspect of the aura you find in religious painting very frequently, particularly in the Renaissance, indications of things like the halo, which is an aspect of the field. And and the colours really just represent different frequencies, which with skill you can learn to interpret what they mean, what they're indicating, and so on, which can be quite helpful for the individual. Yeah.
So does the aura change, for instance, if there's illness in the person? Can you see?
Yeah, absolutely. The aura is part of us. It's part of you. It's the light from the bodies that exist in you on other levels, and so yes, if we're ill, there are quite clear signs in the field. But you can also, because the aura exists in 4, 5, 6 dimensions, it's not a 3-dimensional phenomenon, really. This is where looking into the future comes into this a little bit. And it's important to understand this because in an aura, for example, you might spot something that hasn't yet occurred in the 3-dimensional world. It's still in the 4th-dimensional world. So an illness, you might see the potential for it before it actually manifests at the physical level, and the same is to do with an event. For example, you would see an event manifesting in the auric field before it manifests in 3 dimensions, and this is why clairvoyants can look ahead and often see what is likely to occur in somebody's life, and it's through this field that we still have after physical death, that beings from other levels contact us, because it's quite natural for someone who's no longer in a body to talk to us. It's only our fear of all things hidden or occult, as people say, that produces this strange situation we have now, where when somebody dies, it's almost as if they don't exist anymore, when in fact they're probably more alive than you and I are. And they still have these other layers of themselves. All they've given up is the physical body as we identify it. And so, that the auras, it's our field, it's our light, it's our nature, it's what comes from our spirit or our soul, as some people refer to it as. I mean, that requires a bit more definition probably, but that is what the aura is, yeah.
Words are difficult, aren't they, in this area?
Yeah. I mean, it's always a compromise.
Yes. How would you define soul, for instance?
Well, how would you define the soul? Different philosophers have different terminology. The soul, to me, is made up of different components of the individual. The memory, for example, the part of the mind that has memory, which we would call the subconscious, or some people call the inner child, is the kind of gateway to the soul, or the real self, in which you have the higher mind, which in turn is linked with the essence of the person, the spiritual, the eternal nature of the person. And these things all interact and interface, really. They're all part of a kind of complex unit of individuality, which links to the eternal or the universal or the divine or whatever term people wish to choose for that.
So at this present stage of your life, how are you using your gifts on a daily basis to help?
How do I use my abilities on a daily basis? I still
make
do
appointments.
I still do
to
some
see
private
you?
appointments
Yeah.
for people. Yes.
Yeah.
I teach quite a bit. I do quite a bit of work in the form of courses and workshops and trainings.
So why would somebody make an appointment to come and see you? What's the usual sort of reason?
All kinds of reasons.
Right.
Sometimes it's pure curiosity,
Yeah.
to see whether I've got horns growing out of my head or something like that. Sometimes it's just curiosity. Sometimes it's because when we look at things like the aura, for example, it may be because people want guidance about their life pattern, their career. By looking at an auric field, you can make a pretty good assessment of that person's gifts and abilities, for example. Sometimes it's for that, and in that kind of process, you try to give them strategies or things they can do or whatever to move forward. Maybe to help them overcome a problem or an issue or difficulties. I like work that empowers people, that gives them resources to sort of go forward and make changes themselves. So I use it in that way. My appointments work in that way, you could say. Sometimes it's because they're bereaved or they want to know that their ancestors are still very much alive or exist somewhere. Sometimes I wear my healing hat more and people come to me because they're physically ill or very emotionally ill and they think I can help with that. So it's a raft of things. And often those reasons, they're again, are kind of moulded together in some way. Because you could argue that to know that someone you love dearly still exists in another dimension is a very healing experience for many people. So there's a healing aspect to a lot of it. Now, I do a little bit of corporate work as well to advise companies on certain things to do with hiring staff and sometimes policy and strategy. You can sometimes help with that too, because a corporation has an auric field, believe it or not. A company and an institution, yes. It has a kind of a field made up of all the ideas that are associated with that business, and the players in the business, which are the employees and the managers. And I have been working for, I don't know, 18, 19 years with a couple of companies on certain aspects of what they could do with support on, yes. Like recruitment and so on.
And you go abroad, you do some
I travel a little bit still,
private sittings and teaching abroad as well.
Yes, I go abroad and I do courses and do some private appointments, yes, and that kind of thing, yeah.
We're going to talk a little bit about some of the fears that people have, because this is an area, possibly because of a lot of the horror films and negative stuff that we see on television, cinema, that people are quite nervous about. Do spirit beings always come for a positive reason? If you have somebody with you for an appointment, or I think the fear is that people think that when they die, they may encounter the spirit of a person who's perhaps abused them or mistreated them in some way in this life, and that they will, meet up again, and the whole thing may repeat, something like that.
It's quite an involved question. When we leave this world and go into what we call the next world, all this terminology is rather limiting in a way. But when we've left the physical body, we don't immediately become a saint. But on the other hand, my experience suggests, having communicated with many, many, many souls and individuals that have died or passed through, or whatever you wish to call it, the one thing that is very clear is that the limitations of this world leave us. And so we find ourselves in a state where many of the things that motivated us while we were in a human body, they're no longer an issue for us. So many of the petty jealousies, hates, angers, even some of the nasty things that existed in us, we get a broader perspective and can see how everything is joined, everything is linked. It's one of the great things about certain levels of clairvoyance is you realize that everything is connected and everyone is connected. So if I harm another human being, I'm actually harming me. If I destroy something, I'm destroying part of myself. And so when we're out of the body, we see this. And everything changes. We have a completely different perspective on life. So even someone that you didn't like on Earth, or you found difficult, or was nasty and aggressive, when you pass through to the next level, all of those issues are no longer relevant. And so the chances are that you're going to meet people, individuals, entities who are interested in you, who are connected to you in some way, but certainly not hostile or angry. This is a very, very much part of the fear of being a human being in a limited world. The one thing you feel when you come out of the body, I think I mentioned in one or two of my books that I was struck by lightning when I was 17 and died briefly. And the one thing I remember was how beautiful it was to be out of my body, looking at my supposedly dead body on the floor in the tent where I was hit by lightning. Everything has changed. And we do get glimpses of this if we're lucky on the earth. We have these moments where everything is okay, where life is beautiful, where we just want to do wonderful things for people, and you have these moments. And isn't life great in this moment? Isn't it wonderful? I just want to do wonderful things. And we have a glimpse of this while we're here. But when we come out of the body, this becomes a much more dynamic experience from what I've experienced and what other people have told me. And I think that the fear we have is just the basic fear we experience on Earth. We're afraid of new experiences on the planet. If you start a new job, you might be looking forward to it, but there'll be a part of you thinking, God, am I going to manage this okay? Is it going to be all right? And so on. So we tend to fear what we don't know. And there's another important principle. It's to do with resonances again, and to do with frequencies, we tend to attract what we're like, and we tend to attract what we need. And sometimes in life, it would be lovely if everybody was great and nice to us, but just occasionally to round off some of our square edges, we need people to challenge us and just to toughen us a little bit, maybe. And so this is the way things work. This is how the principles work. But when we go through to the next level, we're part of a great system of life, and we wake up to that, and we become more aware, not less aware, and there's nobody over there going to harm us or do anything terrible to us or anything like that. No. And people that, as I say, you've met in this lifetime that have gone on, and you bump into them again when you go through, the warfare has died down. That has gone. There's a deeper reason that we learn for all the things that we've experienced on Earth. We begin to understand that.
So people might come back to express regret to the person.
Oh yes, very much so. They often come back and say,
happens,
"I'm sorry."
Doesn't it? Yes.
Oh yes, and I've had contacts from people that committed suicide, and they come back to say they're sorry. They're not punished in the next level. There's no, "Oh, you did this. This is terrible." There's no judgment day.
That's an important point,
No judgment
isn't
day.
it?
The only person that judges what they've done on Earth is the individual or the entity themselves. It's like a self-evaluation process. Mm-hmm. It's nothing to do with somebody standing there with a clipboard saying, "Well, that wasn't very good, but that was all right," and you get a kind of score. It's for yourself to understand, for you to recognise what's gone on. I'd like to just go back to something you said about people watching all these movies like Exorcist and all this kind of stuff. Whenever there's a film like that appears or one is released, a new one, I always get an increase in people coming to see me that are having strange experiences in their houses, or hauntings or phenomena. And this is very interesting because it's almost predictable this will happen, because we're all psychic, basically. And if we watch some of these movies and things, which are there to scare us, because people like to be frightened, oddly enough. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many thrillers on the television and in the movies. But people trigger these phenomena. If I go to a haunting, I've been to several. I've had one recently to look at. But what I'm interested in is not the building, not the space in which it's occurring. What I'm interested in is the person that's having the experience, because they are the medium or the psychic mechanism that's triggering all this. If someone's not in the building, there's no haunting.
So the energy, is it to do with the energy being drawn
yes,
from
it's the
person?
psychic energy gets stirred up in the individual, and that triggers these phenomena very often, particularly things like electric lights flashing on and off, all kinds of other things. And I've seen and experienced things moving around the room, this kind of stuff. That kinetic energy is triggered by somebody that's in a physical body on the Earth. You can't have a haunting if there's nobody there. And so I always look for the person that's having the experience. But people get spooked. People like spooky movies. Children stand behind the settee, watching the really frightening film with their eyes just over the top. There's something in us that likes a bit of fear stirred up, and people like to have something to be afraid of. But my fundamental belief is that the only thing people need to be afraid of is themselves and their own fear, not anything else.
That's very reassuring.
Oh, that's my experience anyway.
So, shall we talk a little bit about your new book?
My new book.
Yes.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Well, it's I've written 6 books now, and on some various topics, and I put together a collection of stories of communications with beings that have passed through to other worlds, and I wanted it to be a book that not only told the stories, but put them in context, and where necessary gave explanation of why it was happening or what was happening. and to point out that any being that contacts us does so for a reason. But there are different levels to that reason. And so it is a collection of stories of different types. Young children that have communicated, that have died, perhaps when they were 8 or 9 or 10 or something like that. Contacts with loved ones that have passed through. I look at the difference between what we call a ghost and an entity, and there is a difference. And also other forms of communication. I use the term angels looking through. And the reason I use the term angel is that angel means actually a messenger, someone who brings a message or brings power or light. That's what it means. So if your great-grandmother contacts with you with a message, she's an angel. She's bringing you a message. But there are also the traditional angels that I mentioned earlier on that I used to see at the Mass. And they are different again. I call these engineers of light or subtle form because this is what they do. And this is the kingdom that people often call fairies and undines and, that kind of thing, right up to the great angels of the seraphim and all this kind of thing. They have a very particular role in the cosmos. But the other types of angels are the people that communicate with us too. And this book is about those kind of stories and some of the pitfalls involved in this kind of work, and also some of the difficult moments as well as some of the easier moments, and so on.
Sorry.
That's right, you got a frog in your...
Yeah. Have a little tap at that point.
It's the gin.
I've been reading it, Paul, and I found it absolutely fascinating. And what I particularly like, it's full of compassion, it's full of love, and you come across as a very modest person.
Modest?
Yes.
Oh, I like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because some people who work in this area get quite a lot of problems with ego, I think. But
well, it can be a problem. I think that... I'm pretty lived in now. I'm a bit like an old jacket that's been to the dry cleaners too many times. No, the thing with this work is that it's very special, and it's quite a privilege to do what I do. I've done many things in my life over the years, but this is probably the most important thing I've done. But all those other things have contributed to making me the man I became, and they're all valuable, whether it was being a singer or a teacher or an artist or I tried to be, whatever it was. I just see it as a privilege, and I've always felt that one of the key things in life is to get hold of the extraordinary, but make it ordinary and accessible.
Absolutely.
I'm interested in science, but I was not very good at science at school. But as an adult, I became very interested in physics particularly. And I admire the physicists who can talk to me or write something for me to read and explain a very complex idea in a way that it's accessible for me. Now, I've always felt the same about what I do. I've always felt that the important thing is about it being an area that we look at to understand life, about truth, about healing, really. It's not really an entertainment. And I think when it strays into being used as an entertainment, it's a little bit dangerous, I think. And it loses something special, something very precious. About it. It can be fun, it can be enjoyable. In the book I tell some funny stories. Some of the communications are very funny, and you know one of the stories very well. And there's some funny stories and interesting tales, and I have a lot of humour in the way I work if I'm teaching particularly. There's a lot of humour in what I do. Yes. But I think that for me it's a very precious area. And I'm an ordinary man who does something sometimes with things that people view as extraordinary, but they're not really extraordinary. They're just something natural, I think. that we all should be open to and talk about. You know?
We should.
I mean, we don't talk about death, but it's the one thing you can be pretty sure we'll all have in common.
Yes.
And we'll all do it one day. And when you get to my age, you're nearer the exit than you are the entrance. But that doesn't bother me too much. But the fact is that we should be more open. Ancient cultures, as we know, were much more open about the cycles of life. And older people would know when they were going to pass and would discuss it and prepare for it, you know, particularly in so-called primitive cultures. Not so sure they were primitive. And we should see it as part of a cycle, a sequence of our growth as we travel through space and time, you know, and we're just here for a bit, really, to see how we get on. And it's an exploration, I think, being a human being.